So we don't write down anything while we're taking the test, but I want to explain why. It's not to save time.
Hello and welcome to episode 474 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. I'm Nathan Fox. With me is Ben Olson. We're the co-founders of LSATdemon.com and the LSAT Demon Daily podcast. You can be LSAT famous and share news or ask questions on our website, thinkinglsat.com. We have a free class coming up. This is going to be a free class with you, Ben, on Monday, October 14th. All you got to do to sign up for that class is go to lsatdemon.com/free. You can get invited to Ben's class, and you can also get all sorts of other free resources. What's on the agenda, Ben, for that class on the 14th of October?
We're going to be doing a reading comp passage, and then if there's time, we'll be doing some logical reasoning questions, but I'm going to predict right now that we will not have time. There's usually a lot of questions at those free classes, a lot of good questions about reading comprehension and how to do better in that section. So looking forward to it. But yeah, RC.
Yeah. Sign up, go meet Ben, meet a bunch of our other Demon staff who will be there to answer your questions in the chat. Again, Monday, October 14th, free class with Ben, lsatdemon.com/free. We have an email at the top of our show today from Nicole. The subject is upward trend is now downward.
Okay. Nicole writes, "Hello, Ben and Nathan. I really enjoy your podcast and the LSAT Demon platform. I've been doing a mix of time sections, drilling into individual questions as time allows, and making sure to get my daily high-quality hour in. I took the test for the first time in September, still awaiting my score. I am registered for October and November. I continued studying after the September test, and now it seems like I'm making less progress. The week leading up to the September test, I felt really good, and I completed a timed logical reasoning section with an accuracy of 87% and was able to attempt all the questions. Interesting. My highest accuracy for a timed logical reasoning section. I was able to get into a good, smooth rhythm, and it felt great."
Keep going. I mean, Ben and I both it was like there was a bad smell in the room when she said 87%. We were like, okay, and was able to attempt all the questions. And we were like, oh no, okay, that is not good.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on. Read the rest of this and then we'll talk about it.
Okay. Nicole continues, "The problem is that that was a one-off instance. Since then, I haven't got that high in my time sections, and I feel like I'm missing easy questions. For example, strengthen, necessary assumption, and sufficient assumption questions had finally clicked for me, but now I'm getting them wrong. Please help."
You got to do fewer questions, Nicole. I mean, I know that we're a broken record on this issue, but accuracy of 87% is not that good. Accuracy of 87% when you're finishing the section, it just means, okay, so you're missing 13% of the questions that you're attempting. That indicates that there's another probably 13% of the questions that you got right, but you didn't really understand it. To you, it felt like a good, smooth rhythm. But you were probably just thinking about your pacing and trying to make it to the end of the section, and you ended up just taking some shortcuts that weren't really valid. You ended up falling into a few traps, and there were a few other questions. The traps were the 13% that you missed, but there were things that you didn't really see where you got lucky and you got some of them right. And so this is your best section ever. Hooray, 87% accuracy. And I finished the section. Yay. But then it's unsustainable because you're just doing too many questions. Sure enough, you start doing more timed sections and you don't do that well because I hate to break it to you, Nicole, but you got a bit lucky on that one section that you were so proud of. It's a really easy fix. Do fewer questions. Feel more confident about your answers. Stop worrying about rhythm. I don't know, like rhythm. Some questions you answer in 45 seconds. Other questions you answer in 4 minutes if you're doing it right. Like if you're actually doing the work of a lawyer and solving each question, some of them are going to take a lot longer than others. It should never feel like a good, smooth rhythm. That's like this misconception that we should do every question within 85 seconds or whatever. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, I agree completely. And second, I just really want to emphasize what you're already saying, but maybe from a different angle. And that is, Nicole, if you had done 95 or 100% accuracy on 20 questions or even 18 questions out of the 25, 26 questions in the section, you'd be in a much better position to continue to make progress on the test and to continue to see your score go up than what you did here. So the reason we both reacted to your second comment that you got 87% accuracy and were able to attempt all the questions, that just
Yeah,
means that's a goal of yours. We don't want that to be a
right.
goal of yours. We want your goal to be hyper and solely focused on what percentage of the questions that I'm doing am I getting right? And is that closer to 95 or 100%?
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say too. 95 to 100% accuracy on questions attempted. And you can't balance accuracy and speed. 87% and finished all the questions would be really good for a lot of novices, but it's not actually sustainably good. If that's the best section you've ever done, then we have to assume that you got a little bit lucky there. And sure enough, your results bore that out. The last thing that Nicole said, she said, I feel like I'm missing easy questions. For example, strengthen, necessary assumption, and sufficient assumption questions had finally clicked for me, but now I'm getting them wrong. And I read that and I can see Ben is puzzled looking at his face because strengthen and necessary assumption questions, one, they're very different types because strengthen questions, the record is open and there's this big, wide range of possible correct answers that might strengthen the argument from a lot to a little, or might strengthen the argument by affirmatively building a case, or strengthen the argument by defending the argument against likely attacks. So there's like strengthen can be one of the hardest categories, not one of the easiest categories, but one of the hardest categories because it's got such a wide range of correct answers. Same thing with comparing necessary assumption to sufficient assumption. They're wildly different types. Sufficient assumption questions are easy and predictable because there's usually just one way to get from the evidence to the conclusion. Necessary assumption questions, on the other hand, are a lot more like must be true questions, where there's a pretty good range of possible correct answers, and they tend to be far less predictable. And if you had like put a gun to my head and said, what are the two toughest types of questions? I would probably say strengthen and necessary assumption. So it's clear that Nicole thinks she understands more than she really understands. And it's an easy fix. Do fewer questions, dig deeper into those questions, focus on solving one question at a time, and then thoroughly review all of your mistakes.
I agree totally. The only thing I wanted to add about the question types too is that it must be a small sample size because if you're not good at strengthen questions, you're probably also not very good at weaken questions.
Yeah.
And these things don't just happen overnight. It's not like you're good at them and then you're not good at them. You just never were that great at them, but you probably weren't necessarily not great at these in particular. It's just
Right.
a variety of questions and there's different difficulty
Yeah.
levels. I mean, it's just this is the challenge with focusing on statistics.
Yeah. And focusing on question types generally. I mean,
Yeah.
other LSAT prep providers like really heavily focus on question types from day one.
Hmm.
Even going so far as foolishly encouraging students to read the question first and start getting caught up in question type garbage before they
Yeah.
even understand the argument. We think that that is a devastating mistake, and we think it hurts students, not helps them. I agree that Nicole is going into her like study history and she's seeing the labels of the question types that she's missed. And now she thinks like, well, so now I have a problem with strengthened, necessary assumption, and sufficient assumption. It's like, well, okay, for first of all, that's like 1/3 of the test. Second, you're not going to get anywhere by focusing on those big picture buckets. The only way you're ever going to learn is just one question at a time.
Yeah.
So slow down during your timed section. Also slow down in your review. And instead of looking at statistics, look at individual questions you've missed.
Great. This next one is from Anonymous. The subject is note taking and timing.
First off, thank you for the tips in your podcast. It's been super helpful. I started to ignore the clock and my accuracy is high. I'm getting around 19 of 20 questions attempted right. I'm wondering if I'm struggling because I write down a lot for each question. It's helpful to write stuff down so I can better follow it and stay engaged. But to what extent should I be taking notes? I feel like if I didn't write as much, it would save me time, but potentially lower my accuracy. So I need a recommendation on how you would write down key points, if at all.
Okay. So we don't write down anything while we're taking the test. We would encourage you also to not write down anything. But I want to explain why. It's not to save time, although you can save time by not writing things down. That's not the goal. The goal is actually to let go of, I don't even know if I should call them training wheels, but this idea, right? You can't really do something until you just entirely abandon it, right? The notes become a crutch. And you're not letting it's kind of like diagramming. It becomes a crutch, and then your mind leans on that and then needs it. And until you just decide, no, I'm not going to do that at all, and then let another part of your mind take over and really visualize this stuff and take it in and start to see it. This might be unique to me, but one thing that's odd is that I've noticed, and I don't know that this necessarily relates, this is more of an analogy, but I do better at understanding videos sometimes when I don't watch the speaker. So when I'm watching them, there's
visual
more
distractions,
stimulus, even if it's just them lecturing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I just let the audio come to me, and then it's like I can let my eyes turn to the content, I'm better able to understand it. And I think that is happening here on some level. You're depending on what you're writing down, just step back. It's almost like you read a sentence and then you look away from the page because you're trying to figure out and see what the text is actually saying.
Yeah, I agree that this note-taking seems like a crutch for Anonymous. I mean, I don't do it. Ben doesn't do it. As far as I know, none of our LSAT Demon teachers and tutors do this. And it's not something that we teach. So we in fact, we actively say, don't bother taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like Anonymous thinks that maybe they would benefit, but they're worried that it would potentially lower their accuracy, so they haven't even tried it.
Mm-hmm.
My prescription would be try it for a while and see how it goes. Don't just try it for one test and then like take a small sample and say, oh, it actually hurt my accuracy. Try it for a month. And instead of taking notes, like you say that it's helpful to write stuff down so I can better follow it and stay engaged. You think that, but if you did it our way, I don't think that would be the case. Instead of writing stuff down and engaging, like you're actively reading in a superficial way. And maybe that superficial way of actively engaging causes you to actually engage. And by that, I mean critically engage, because just writing it down is like, I mean, you could just hire a scribe to write everything down, but that's not actually engaging. That's just note taking. That's just like making a transcript. Making a transcript doesn't help. There's already a transcript. It's on the page. So what are you actually doing? Well, what we are teaching you to do is to engage with the argument. What are you trying to conclude here? What evidence do you have that form your basis for that conclusion? And is this bullshit? If you're not asking that question, then you're definitely doing it wrong. And I don't know. 19 out of 20 accuracy is pretty good, right? That 95% accuracy, that's great.
That's great.
That's so you're doing something right, clearly. But I think that you should try getting rid of this note-taking idea. And yeah, your accuracy might suffer in the short run. Your speed might also suffer in the short run. I don't know what's going to happen in the short run, but I have a pretty strong hypothesis that in the long run, you're going to realize that the note-taking wastes a bunch of time. It changes your focus from really the argument to your like physical representation of the argument on the page. And I don't like, no one's ever going to look at that page.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of wasted effort there. And I feel like in the long run, it's probably just distracting you. So give it a shot without note taking. And please do write us back. You can just message us at thinkinglsat.com. Next one is from Megan. This is a submission for our recurring feature on the podcast that we call Pearls versus Turds, where someone submits a perceived, bit of wisdom that they think they've found on the internet or somehow in their LSAT studies, and they submit it to us to tell them whether it is a pearl of wisdom or it's another turd for the growing pile of turds. Our scoreboard so far, by the way, is 30 pearls, 80 turds, and 26 ties. We've been doing this for a long time, Ben.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Megan.
Okay, she writes, I have often heard you talk about correct answers we mistakenly think we understood because of a lucky guess, making them hard to review. Okay, well, yeah, we just talked about it earlier on this episode. I have also heard you warn against bookmarking because subconsciously our brains are still expending energy on blank questions until we come back to them.
Yep.
While I have been working on slowing down and forcing myself to pick the one defensibly right answer, sometimes I still know I want to review a question regardless of whether I get it correct. I've been using the bookmark feature to mark these answered, but not always with 100% confidence, questions. I have found this helpful many times as a way to reinforce my reasoning and understand why an answer was really correct. But do you think this is hurting my mental process in any way, similar to how the brain processes skipped questions? Thanks so much. So if I understand, Megan, you're going through a section, you're flagging questions that you're not 100% sure about. And then once the section is done and you're in review, you're going back to those because you picked an answer. You might have got it right, but before you picked the answer and before you knew it was correct, you weren't 100% confident and you want to double check those.
The reason why I think this is a turd is because it's not something I want you to do on the official test. And I want you to practice your timed sections the way you're going to play on game day. I want you to treat your practice sections and your practice tests just like your official test. And I just don't want you bookmarking questions on your official test because you're never going to be able to go back and review those bookmarks. The purpose of the bookmarks on the official test is so that you can, in theory, go back and work on them more after you've made it all the way through the section, which is just a strategy that we do not endorse here at Thinking LSAT and the LSAT Demon. So I do think that, if you do it on the official test, then yeah, your brain is subconsciously going to be thinking, I got to go back and review this question. I got to go back and review this. I got to go before the 35 minutes is up. I got to go back and work on that one some more, and every one you bookmark adds to the weight of that, where it's like, oh, now it's 2 questions that I got to make sure I go back and check again. Oh, now it's 3 questions that I go back. I got to make sure I save time so that I can go back and look at those 3 questions. I get it, Megan, that you're saying that, you're doing this during your practice test so that you can go back and be sure about the questions that you weren't 100% sure of. But can't you do that anyway? I mean, my theory would be that if you stopped this bookmarking, just do the section like you're going to do it on game day, then go back when you're done and just look at each question briefly. I mean, just scan the argument. Did I have a hard time? Do I think I had a hard time with this one? Do I think I had a hard time with that one? I feel like it would take 10 seconds per question to scan each one. And you're going to realize that some of those that you did have a hard time with, you got right, but then you're going to go back and review it. And I don't like the bookmarks save you maybe a little bit of time, but review is the most valuable thing you can do. So, like, does it really hurt you to go back through number 1, number 2, number 3, and like look at the argument and go, yeah, no, I nailed that one. Okay, next one. Yeah, no, I nailed that one. Okay, next one. I just don't think it takes very long. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't. So a couple things. One, our practice is always going to be a little bit different than our official tests on some level, right? We do drilling, we do time sections instead of full tests. We sometimes do whatever. But so I've never thought that the bookmark in the daemon should be used how it's used on the official test, which is to mark things and then go back to them. I've always thought that if someone is going to use it, they would use it in this way. They would say, hey, I picked an answer here, but I'm not sure about the answer. So I want to remember to come back to it, not during the section, but after it's over. And I could see this as a way of taking it out of your mind. Like sometimes when you have a list of things you have to do, it's actually better to write them down so you can let go of them. So I could see some people, bookmarking a question during a time section, and then that's inviting them to come back to it during the time section. But if they really believe that the point of this is to come back to it after the section is over, it could actually release them from that question.
Yeah, but then they're not going to get that same release on the official test.
I mean, you don't have a chance to review it afterward. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
such a problem.
Maybe not. I just and I acknowledge that that there are things that we do differently in our practice than we're doing on the official test. But to the extent that those things can be easily minimized, I don't see why we wouldn't just minimize those. And this feels to me like another kind of a bit of a crutch for Megan. I suppose that when Megan takes the official test, she could just follow her usual habit of bookmarking and just say, yeah, I know I'm not going to go back and review it, but that's one that I wasn't 100% sure about. My problem with that though, and again, I still am going to call this a turd. We don't have to agree, Ben. But I'm still going to call the bookmarking a turd because suppose it does give her that mental release because she's like, well, I'm not 100% sure, but I know I can go back and review it afterward. But then on the official test, she's not going to have that luxury. So it's like now you're allowing yourself this release that you're really not going to have on the official test. I don't know. I guess here's my thing. The more important it is to you, Megan, the worse it is for you to do this. Because if it's really important to you, then it's like, well, okay, but on the official test, you're not really going to have that. You're not going to be able to scratch that itch. You're not going to be able to go back and review that question in the way you want to review it because you're never going to see that test again. I don't know. Any final thoughts?
My only final thought is I think the bookmark issue is, and maybe this is similar to what you're saying, but it's more of an issue because people think of the bookmark as a tool to use during the test.
Like to go back, to save time.
Yeah.
To go
if you
back.
just abandon that idea entirely and it's kind of like, I remember a long time ago when we were taking these tests, paper based, right? You'd be doing a section, and sometimes people write down, they put like a little dash on their Scantron to be
Mm-hmm.
like, that question was hard for me. It's not about going back. It's about, I want to learn from that question later. And
Yep.
you can scan through and remember which one it was. So it's not like you need this, but maybe it's not that big of a deal. And maybe that's where we could agree that if it's really, really important to you, maybe it's something you shouldn't do. But if you're
Yeah.
just using it for what it is, a tool, fine.
Okay. We can call it a tie. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I still think it's a turd and you shouldn't do it, but we can call it a tie on the official scoreboard. Scoreboard update then is 30 pearls, 80 turds, 27 ties. If you have a pearl versus turd candidate, please let us know at thinkinglsat.com or find us on socials at LSATdemon.
All right. So this next one, you flagged a tutoring report from Abigail, LSAT Demon team member Abigail, as a snapshot of what a good one-on-one tutoring session looks like.
Oh, wow. That was thoughtful of me. I don't even remember what I was doing. What I think it's you to read it. Oh,
Okay.
no, it's me to read it. No, I'm wrong.
Okay. Go ahead.
We reviewed, so this was a tutoring report from Abigail, and it said, we reviewed 2 LR sections from test 152. We focused on the distinction between strengthened and supported questions, which he frequently gets mixed up. We also corrected his misinterpretation of a reasoning question. He interpreted, quote, the argument proceeds by to mean, quote, the argument precedes. So then when he went into the answer choices, he was looking for something, for quote, something the author would probably say next.
Interesting.
Of course, that
Okay.
question, when it says the argument proceeds by what, they're saying, what did the argument do?
Hmm.
How did the argument proceed?
Or unfold. Yeah.
Yeah. How, like, what went down in that argument is what
Yeah.
they're asking you. So the reason why I flagged this as good one-on-one tutoring is because the student had done 2 timed logical reasoning sections and then showed up to the meeting with Abigail with questions.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to emphasize that if you're going to pay hundreds of dollars an hour for one-on-one tutoring, you need to do your damn homework in between sessions. I do not want our LSAT Demon tutors just like babysitting our students. That is a wildly expensive study buddy if all you're going to do is show up and say, yeah, well, I haven't really had time to study since our last session. So, let's do some new questions. And like, I'm taking money out of my own pocket by doing this PSA. But I feel like it's important because I know that there are other prep companies out there that are like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll just you don't need to do anything. Just show up to our let's do tutoring 4 times a week and yeah, we'll just sit down and do some work together."
Yeah.
And like I guess if you come from a multi-million dollar family that, you got mom's Amex and you're just going to spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on one-on-one help, you can feel free to do it that way. But for the majority of students out there who are, not from those kinds of means, I really want to encourage you to get the most out of your tutoring sessions. We have excellent tutors at LSAT Demon. We got a whole squad of amazing tutors. And Abigail's one of our master tutors that gets billed out at a higher rate than our regular tutors. And if you're going to be working with any of our tutors, you just please make sure that you are prepared before you show up for that session.
Yeah. And you're not saying that doing questions together isn't valuable, because sometimes, right, you have someone work through a question with you that they haven't seen before and listen to how they reason through it.
Sure.
And that can reveal all sorts of misunderstandings about the thought process.
I,
But
I
you are
can see,
saying,
well, I can
Mhm.
certainly see value in doing that sometimes,
Yeah.
but that should not be your MO. That should not be your main tutoring plan. Your main tutoring plan needs to be do your own work, get yourself into the weeds a little bit, show up at your tutoring session with like, hey, can we look at these few questions where I don't, like I missed it and I reviewed it and I just still can't understand why, or I got it right, but there's this other answer that I still, like I'm not quite sure. So can you use your high priced expertise to tell me exactly why that wrong answer is wrong and why this right answer is really the only defensible answer? And I think that that should be probably the bulk of your one-on-one work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I did a lot of tutoring with people where I would do questions with them because I feel like a lot of the problems start in the passage. So when you do this work and you come with a question, which I think people should be doing work outside of tutoring, that's great, but it focuses at the end of the process, right? Oh, I have this confusion.
Mhm.
And maybe the problem actually started with why did you skip past that sentence and not break it
Well,
down more? And why
sure,
didn't you relate those two sentences to each other?
sure, but I guess my response is you can do both. I mean, they show up with a question that they struggled with,
Hmm.
and then as
Hmm.
the tutor, you say, "Okay, let's see you do it."
Yeah,
Like, I'll
totally.
sit here and shut up. I
Yeah.
want you to read it to me. And then when I say I'm going to shut up, I'm not going to shut up. They're going to read the first sentence and immediately go into the second sentence. And I'm going to go, hold on a second. Can you recap for me what that first sentence said?
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask them questions. Okay, so do you think that's a premise or do you think that's a conclusion? What did they mean when they said XYZ? So you can absolutely do questions together. But as a tutor, I always had a preference. It just felt like if you're not doing the work in between sessions.
Oh,
Now,
100%. I agree. I mean, that would be crazy just to do questions in tutoring. Like you have to do this work
yeah,
beforehand
that's the
and
thing that I really want. So that's the
come
thing that
with
I'm really
questions.
concerned about. Okay, good. We're
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
same page there. Like, yeah, you
Yeah.
absolutely are going to do questions alongside your tutor. But if that's the only time you're going to be doing any
Yeah,
prep
definitely
work,
not good.
you're not going
Yeah.
to get magical improvement. Um, that's where I feel like there are a small subset of students. They don't tend to be very successful in the long run. There's a small subset of students who are like, I'm going to make my mom and dad happy by spending thousands of dollars on their credit card.
Yeah.
And that's all they're really doing. It's like,
Or
if
they want the success, but they just want someone else to pull them along and
yeah,
get it to
yeah.
happen. And
In my
that's tough.
experience, it's usually the former, though, where it's like,
Yeah.
mom and dad have been hassling me about this. And the one sure way to make them believe that I'm doing something is to put a big ass ding on their Amex bill. So
Yeah.
let me sign up for all this really expensive tutoring. And then sometimes people just don't show up,
Oh,
or they do show up and they're
yeah.
completely unprepared. And it's
Show up
like,
late.
well,
Yeah.
it's disrespectful of your tutor, for one. It's building a bad foundation for your legal career because you might run across these people in the future and it's just wasting mom and dad's money.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Sometimes it's like,
Yeah.
well, they actually don't care either. They just want me to be doing something. And if I put this on their credit card bill, then it looks like I'm doing something and they're temporarily happy. And so we all win. I don't know. you know,
Yeah.
Adolescent brains do funny things, but okay. Anyway, this next item is from Alex, and the subject is spacing attempts, parentheses, and one side question.
Okay. Alex says, "Hi, Ben and Nathan. I was a 145 diagnostic and am now scoring above 165 on my time to practice tests. I have 3 attempts left. Other 2 were with another company when I got a 151 and a 153, scoring 158 to 163 on practice tests at the time of those tests." Okay,
Hmm.
so you underperformed your practice test range on the official tests.
Yeah.
I treated those official tests with the "this is it" mindset, and it caused me lots of anxiety on test day. Yeah,
Okay.
we hear that a lot.
Well, that's
Yep.
and that would have been probably my first hypothesis. The second you say I was scoring 158 to 163 on my practice tests, but I scored 151 and 153, we're talking about 7 points below and 5 points below the bottom of your practice test range. If you're underperforming, then you're definitely doing something different on the test, on the official test. And one of the real common things that people do is they just like, okay, I'm only going to take this test once. This is it. I'm done after this. This is the be all end all of my LSAT career. Here we go. Game day. I got to really perform. And
Yeah.
that always leads to underperformance because you're doing your practice tests in a calmer way where you're letting yourself actually solve each question before you move on. And when you have that this is it mindset, you're just doing different stuff. So that none of that is surprising. Good news is that's only 2 attempts. You've still got 3 official attempts left. Let's hear the rest of this.
Alex writes, I plan next spring to put your advice into practice and use up my remaining 3 attempts. I had my first 171 last week if I put my time sections of a test together and calculate the score. So I feel like I'm inching closer to being ready for my final 3 swings at the plate. What's the best way to spread these spring tests out?
Hmm.
I'm planning to apply broadly in September of 2025. Also, okay, maybe we could stop there.
Mhm.
Spread them out. I would do them back to back. If you're ready to take the first one, then you should be ready for the next 2.
That's what I always say. I mean, we can look at the actual calendar here. Dates for spring of 2025. January. Is January spring? It's spring in some places. It's
That's winter in a lot of places, but yeah.
it's winter in other places. But the 2025 testing year starts with January, and then there's a test in February, and then there's a test in April, and then there's a test in June.
Okay.
Um, we do not have any further dates because LSAC announces their dates on a weird academic cycle where they call it the 2024-2025 cycle, and that always ends with the June test. So we don't know what the tests are going to be after that, but there will probably be an August test, a September test, an October test. That's what it was this year, was August, September, October, November. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
And
correct.
sometimes some of those tests go into the next year. And, by the way, lsat.link /dates, and you can see the list of all of these dates. I would, if I was Alex, hope to be ready for the January test. Although, you just scored a 171.
Could you be
You don't,
ready for November? Is that what you're wondering?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a November test that you can still register for. Well, no, by the
Not by
time
the
this
time
comes
you.
out,
Yeah.
you can't. So the ship already sailed on November for Alex. Okay, that's fine. So January, February, April, and June, I think, Ben, that you would want to take 3 out of those 4 tests, right? Like if you want to really apply at the very beginning of the cycle, why would you wait for an August or a September test? And so I would try to get myself ready. And by ready, what I mean is I look at my practice tests and I go, yeah, I'm doing great. I got a lot of 170 somethings on my record now. And I'm going to take that January test. And if you take the January test, then I think that, you're saying by definition, I'm also going to be ready to take February and April regardless of how I perform on the January and February tests. If I do really, really well, then okay, fine, maybe I withdraw from February. But I wouldn't ever recommend that people intentionally space out their tests. If you're ready, then you're ready. So take the test, and then regardless of what your score is, maybe you underperform again. I mean, that means that you need to have a heart to heart with yourself about what you're doing differently on the official test than what you did on all your practice tests.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that you're not ready to take the next official test because your practice test scores really do indicate your ability. And if you were happy with your scores before you took that January test, then I don't see how the January results should negatively influence whether you think you're ready for the February test.
I totally agree. So basically, you're probably shooting for January, February, and April. Those are the 3 tests that are next to each other. But if you're not ready by January, if your practice tests don't indicate that that's the right test for you, then I would shoot for February, April, June. And if you're not ready for February, then I would do April, June, August.
Right.
None of
Yeah, it's
all of
just
those are equally valid options.
yeah, and they're no different from one another. The tests are scaled in advance. It's not like they're curved against any other like testing cohort or whatever. There is no test that's easier than any other test. No test that's harder than any other test. Just test when you're ready. And then once you're ready, you're ready. So you shouldn't be thinking about spacing them out or like allowing addition. I've heard people say, well, I took that test, but then I wanted more time to prepare before I took the next one. And to me, that just indicates that you shouldn't have taken the first one.
You weren't ready. Yeah, there's practice tests. There's plenty of them. Take them until you're happy.
Cool.
Okay, so Alex says also, on a recent episode, you did not recommend using untimed tests for drilling. What are your thoughts on slowly and smoothly finishing sections and then seeing how long it took? I feel confident when I do this and finish only 3 or 4 minutes over time. Thanks.
That's the same thing as doing an untimed test. I mean, that is doing an untimed test. I'm glad you feel happy doing it that way, and you're still doing real LSAT questions, and you're taking the time to focus on them and get them right. I don't think that that's I don't think that it's a bad thing that you're doing that. I just think that you can't use that as a substitute for also making sure that you expose yourself to the drama, potential stress and drama of that ticking clock. And you need to practice starting the section, turning off the clock. You need to practice calmly answering questions for 30 minutes, ignoring the clock. You need to practice how it feels when the 5-minute warning pops up. You need to practice clicking in guesses for the rest of your questions at the 5-minute warning. You need to practice calmly answering one more question correctly in that 5 minutes, even while the ticking clock is up there. These are all things that you have to like give yourself exposure therapy on. And when you're doing untimed sections, you're not allowing yourself the benefit of that exposure. So doing this from time to time, I have no problem with at all. But I also want you to make sure that you're doing your timed practice. What are your thoughts?
I agree 100%. And I want a new episode or a new segment of the show. Okay. So you've given this analogy a lot on the show before. So our listeners can possibly guess what analogy I'm thinking of. You've given it before. It has to do with what you just talked about. And my one clue is white.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Cloth.
White cloth. I don't know.
Tablecloth. The tablecloth analogy.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Mhm. How's that apply?
Well, wasn't the idea that people who saw videos on how to pull out the tablecloth
Yeah.
with all the silverware on it thought they would do better than those who actually tried it,
Uh-huh.
but they did worse?
Uh-huh.
So what Alex is doing here is Alex is imagining what it's like to do a section with time, but not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to try it. You have to experience it and say no to the clock. You can't just this Alex is like, I feel so good, but it's precisely because you don't have the clock running that you are able to go only 3 or 4 minutes over time.
Yeah, like Alex could be giving himself the false confidence
Mm-hmm.
of here's how it feels to do the section untimed. And, but I did time myself in the background and I realized that I'm only finishing 3 or 4 minutes over time. Yeah, okay. Well, but then let's see how you perform on a timed section, like an actual time section where there's a clock that's ticking on the page and then you have to turn that clock off. And then you see the little graphical representation, even though you should ignore it and even put a piece of a sticky note on top of it so you don't have to see it. Some
Yeah.
students have done that. We've talked about that on the show before.
Yeah.
Probably not allowed technically, but people do it.
Yeah.
And you have to, like, you know, is it going to give you a ding to your confidence when that 5-minute warning pops up? Is it going to distract you when you now see a countdown timer, 5 minutes counting down? You know, is that going to now cause you to rush to the end of the section and miss every question? Or are you going to calmly, carefully differentiate yourself from all the other students, you know, the lemmings who are just crashing over the cliff during that last 5 minutes because they're trying to answer 5 questions in 5 minutes and they just miss all of them? And instead, are you going to differentiate yourself from that group by just solving one more question and then maybe solving one more question after that? That's a big difference in your score, right? That's 1 or
Yeah.
2 additional questions per section that you're going to get right that they're not going to get because they're just going to, like, tragically fall into every trap and just miss every question that they attempt. Yeah. So I see the analogy now that, like people who watch the tablecloth video and develop this false confidence that, oh, that looks easy.
Mhm.
You know, Alex is giving himself false confidence potentially by doing these untimed sections.
Thanks, Alex. This next one is from Anonymous. The subject is transcript and addenda confusion.
Hmm. Hi, Ben, Nathan, and/or Eric. I received a 165 on my LSAT and am preparing my application packets for law school. I submitted my transcripts from grad school and my certificate programs, and then had to do a little research for undergrad. Why? It's been 7 years since I got my bachelor's degree and saw on my undergrad transcript that I had transfer credits with 2 community colleges. While I was pulling those transcripts through the e-transcript system Parchment, I saw reference to a third institution not on my degree transcript. This seemed familiar, but only barely, and I requested this third transcript for myself to review. Apparently, I started a course and withdrew it at a third community college and left it at that. I don't really know what happened, and I'm tempted to leave it off my LSAC record so as to not overcomplicate things. Does that seem okay? Or should I be documenting this and trying to make an addenda? But if I don't remember what happened, how do I write one? Thanks.
Okay, first of all, taking a course and withdrawing from it within time means you get no grade, right? And therefore, this should have no impact on your GPA. If that's true, who cares?
But
Next email?
no, not next email, because I think that you absolutely need to request this transcript via the Credential Assembly Service.
Hmm.
I think that the question is going to ask something like, give us the transcripts for every higher education institution that you were ever enrolled in. Now, I might be wrong about that. And Anonymous is going to have to actually read that prompt and see what it's asking you to do. But when you apply to law school, it is the first step in a legal career. And all this shit is going to be documented. And if you make representations on your law school applications that were false, you could end up getting yourself in a big pickle 4 years from now. When you're graduating from law school, you're applying for membership to the bar of your state, and they go in and do a bunch of research, and then they find out that there was a school that you were enrolled in, but you never uploaded the transcripts. I mean, I think that this is a really small risk. But Ben, as you say, if it's not going to affect your GPA anyway, if it probably doesn't matter, and if it is going to negatively affect your GPA, then you should do it even more. I mean,
Yeah.
you just can't not disclose things.
I agree 100%. Maybe that's what I was trying to say is put it on your record because who
Yeah.
cares?
Okay, good.
Not
Yeah.
who cares.
And
It's inconsequential. Therefore, who cares whether you put it on your record or not? No, put it on your record, but don't worry about it. And don't feel the need to write an addendum or anything. If someone does ask you about it, you say, I started a class and decided to withdraw.
yeah. Now,
What else do you want to know? I mean, what else is there to know?
if it turns out that Anonymous did not withdraw in time,
Mm,
and if it turns out that that's going to count as an F,
mm.
and it turns out that it lowers your UGPA, then maybe you could consider writing an addendum
Well, wait, before we
saying,
get even there, right? Try to
Mhm.
get this expunged.
oh,
Try to
sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. Before you even try to upload these transcripts, I would call that community college and I would say, "Hey, was I really ever even enrolled at your school? I don't remember this. I'm seeing a weird third I'm seeing this weird transcript where apparently started a class, but then I withdrew. And do I even have a transcript from your school?" But if they have a transcript on record, I think you've got to upload this to LSAC.
Yeah.
I mean, now it is possible. Like if they're showing an F or if they're showing a 0, if they're showing a no show or some weird thing where it's like, nope, this person just registered for a class and then flaked out. It might be possible to talk to them and say, "Hey, look, I was a sophomore in high school. I signed up for this class through some school program and I ended up not ever doing it. Is it possible to just get this expunged from my record?" And that might simplify things somewhat, but I don't think this is ever going to even I think it's a nothing. I think it's a 0, but lawyers do a lot of work on things that they think are probably nothing, but right? Like you got to behave like a lawyer in your law school applications. So I know that it's a hassle. I know that it's like hoops to jump through, but this is just the beginning of just a lifetime of jumping through hoops. So I'd get on the phone, I'd get on the email, I would start talking to that school, and I probably, in the long run, you're going to end up wanting to just request this transcript through the credential assembly service and forget about it. Emma writes in, and her subject is LSAT, to cancel, score, or not? Question mark.
Don't worry about it. Let's see what she says. Hello, Ben and Nathan. I hope all is well with you two. I plan to apply to a Canadian law school. Oh, okay. The average is LSAT scores rather than considering the highest score. I'm taking your guys' advice and applying broadly, but this is my dream school. I'm sitting for the October LSAT and plan to retake it as needed to apply for the next cycle. Since this school averages one's LSAT scores, would either of you recommend canceling the score if I underperform on my upcoming test? Thank you guys for all your insights during each podcast episode and for all you do. Best, Emma. So I initially said, don't worry about canceling it. You can just keep it. But that's for the American system. For the Canadian system, I would reverse that and say,
Well,
yes, if you
and
underperform.
it's not the Canadian system. It's a very rare school in Canada that averages.
Oh,
I
really? So
think
it's not widespread.
I think it might be one school that averages in Canada. It is not widespread in Canada. Most law schools in Canada only care about your highest score. The vast majority of students shouldn't ever worry about canceling because law schools are only going to care about your highest score.
Hmm.
But in this instance only, when you are applying to a school that has told you we average LSAT scores, then yeah, I can see how score preview might be worth it.
Yeah.
Because it allows you to look at your official score and go, whoa, that's lower than all my practice tests. I mean, I know I can do better than that. Okay, fine, cancel and retake.
Yeah.
But I just never would advise that for 99% of students applying to 99% of law schools. They're only going to care about the highest one. And so you just don't even need to worry about canceling. Because if you cancel, it's just a nothing. And a nothing and a bad score are equivalent because they're only going to take your highest score. So who cares?
Yeah. Well, and when you cancel, you lose that score. So now you can't even use it.
Correct. Yeah. And so the downside to canceling is, what if it turns out like you thought that was terrible for you, but it turns out you never do better? That would be tragic. So yeah, don't cancel scores, except for this one extreme circumstance. And even then, I would think don't do it. Don't cancel probably without score preview, because I'll just never forget the student who thought that they had done terribly and was like begging me for permission to cancel. And
Mm,
then when they got their score back, it turned out to be a 178.
jeez
I
Louise.
mean, I'm glad they didn't cancel that.
Yeah.
So what I don't I just don't trust that students are really good at assessing how well or how poorly they actually did.
Yeah.
The only exception to that might be if you like actually walked out of the test. Something really bad happened. There was an emergency, you got sick, you were not able to finish the test because of a panic attack or whatever. In that circumstance, okay, fine. That that's not your best performance, so fine, cancel. Uh, but still, there's not really a lot of upside to it because you're going to have to retake it, and the schools are really only going to look at your highest score.
We have an article here from the Harvard Crimson. Enrollment of students of color drops 8 percentage points at Harvard Law School.
Interesting. So, Harvard Law School released demographic data for its JD class of 2027 on Thursday. This is from S. Mac Healy and Saketh Sundar, who are on the Harvard Crimson staff, apparently. This was updated September 20th. The share of students of color enrolled in Harvard Law School's JD class of 2027 dropped by 8 percentage points compared to last year, according to data released by HLS on Thursday. The class of 2027 is the law school's first class admitted after the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action. Are you surprised by this, Ben?
Um, a little. I thought that schools might still, I don't know, use other means to balance out their class. I don't know if that's effectively violating the Supreme Court decision or not, but I thought that the impact would be smaller.
Yeah. Remember that, Harvard was one of the schools that was specifically
Named.
in the lawsuit. I mean,
Yeah.
they weren't just some other school where the court wasn't weighing in on their admissions policies specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was Harvard Law School, right? But it was Harvard undergrad that
Yes.
was like specifically mentioned, and they had that thing with the so-called LOP list
Yep.
where it was like, okay, we got 40 names on this list and we can only admit 20 of them. So we're going to have to lop half of the names on this list. And they had explicit criteria for what things, to not lop certain people. And one
Yeah.
of the things was based explicitly on race. If they're an
Yeah.
underrepresented minority, we're going to not lop them from this lop list because we want to work on our diversity numbers. And that's what the Supreme Court took specific issue with in those suits. So it doesn't surprise me. I think this is the first law school where we've
Yep.
seen demographic data from the recently started class of 2027. And so I'm not surprised that there was a drop at Harvard specifically, since they have to be really careful, I would think, right? I mean, I would think that if it didn't drop, I would almost think that they would just immediately get sued again,
Sure. Yeah.
right? So
You're not
that's not
following the
surprising
mandate.
that
Yeah.
they had to probably follow the explicit letter of the law.
Yeah.
Other schools, though, that were not named, we'll see how much they actually follow or don't follow the recommendations. And from what we've seen so far in undergraduate schools, it seems like there's been a diversity of approaches to this. It's also, as we've mentioned previously on the show, it's going to be really hard to report on this area because people sometimes apply as multiracial. And when the percentage of people applying as multiracial changes, then the percentage of all of the different color, whatever students of color or various different racial ethnic backgrounds, that changes a lot based on how many people are identifying as multiracial. And so we've seen in the undergraduate results, we've talked about this on previous episodes, but we've seen that it can be really hard to really draw many conclusions at all.
Yeah, what's changing and why? Yeah.
Yeah, we can't really figure it out, but we will be very interested. So thank you. I assume maybe this was Eric that found this and put it on the agenda. Um, Eric, I hope you're having a good time in Utah. He's on a adventure this week with his
Oh,
wife
cool.
in the national parks in Utah. Hope he's
Nice.
having a great time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for putting this on the agenda.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, so now word of the week. This one is coming from Matt Dumont, who is just an original demon. He was with us from the very beginning. Then he went off to law school on a full ride scholarship, and now he's an actual practicing attorney. And he is also back working with us,
Yeah.
teaching. So fantastic to have Matt back in the fold. You want to read Matt's word of the week?
Yeah. So this is from test 111, passage 4. The sentence says the latter theory holds that judges ought to interpret the law by consulting their own moral convictions, even if this means ignoring the letter of the law and the legal precedents for its interpretation. Dworkin regards this as an impermissible form of judicial activism that arrogates to judges powers properly reserved for legislators.
Okay, so if you had told me without any context what asked me what arrogates means,
Yep.
I would have been like, irrigates? I don't know. I don't know what I would have had no clue what arrogates means. But
I mean, it
let me
sounds
see it.
like arrogant, but here it sounds like allocate, right?
Well, in context, right?
Yeah.
So the trick that I would employ here is something that I learned from my former student and current awesome LSAT teacher, Ala, who works for us and teaches classes. And Ala just replaces that unknown word with something. So I'm going to read it again, and I'm going to put something in the place of arrogates and see if I can understand everything else around it. And then I'm going to try to figure out what something means in that context. So again, the latter theory holds that judges should consult their own moral convictions, even if this means ignoring the letter of the law. Dworkin regards this as an impermissible form of judicial activism that some things to judges powers properly reserved for legislators. So now what is that something? What does Dworkin think these judges are doing?
Well, given that it's impermissible, it sounds like stealing or improperly allocating or
yeah. It's like the context tells you everything you need to know about the word. Judges, Dworkin thinks that these powers are properly reserved for legislators. And judges who are doing this form of judicial activism are arrogating to themselves these powers. So stealing, taking away. I see this, the just sort of grabbing.
gathering. Yeah.
Arrogating. It's like similar to aggregating, I suppose, like just sort of, growing their own shit by stealing shit from others.
Yeah.
Should we look at the actual definition?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
To claim or seize without justification, to make undue claims to having, to assume, so on.
Like to assume power.
Yeah.
Right? Like to assume the role of, like, I'm the decision maker here.
Yeah.
So there is arrogate. Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for putting that on our agenda. You can be LSAT famous. You can ask questions or share news with us on our website, thinkinglsat.com, or all the socials at LSAT Demon. If you have questions about LSAT Demon, you can email help@lsatdemon.com. Please check out our other podcast, LSAT Demon Daily. That was episode 474 of the Thinking LSAT podcast. Thanks all y'all for listening. Nice knowing you. Don't pay for law school.